Hey, welcome back to Compounding Quietly. A lot of investors feel like they found something smarter than the S&P 500. Half QQQ, half SCHD. Growth on one side, income on the other. But smarter and better for you are not the same question. Let's get into it. The idea makes sense on the surface. QQQ gives you concentrated exposure to the largest technology and growth companies in the world. SCHD gives you dividend income, backed by companies with a consistent record of growing their payouts. Put them together and you get both sides of the market. Or so the thinking goes. This particular combination has been circulating across investing communities for years now. And it keeps coming back because it speaks to something real. Most investors want growth, but they also want something that holds up when the market gets difficult. They don't want to feel like they're going all in on one bet. They want a setup that makes sense across different market environments, not just the good ones. That instinct is healthy. The desire to balance growth and stability is not a mistake. The question is whether the way you're building that balance actually does what you think it does. But here's where the thinking often gets blurry. When people compare QQQ and SCHD against the S&P 500, the conversation almost always centers on numbers: past returns, average yield, maximum drawdown, performance in down years. And depending on which time window you look at, the numbers can seem to make a compelling case for the combination. The problem is that numbers tell you what happened. They don't tell you whether that same outcome is likely to repeat. And they definitely don't tell you which structure fits your actual situation. This is the moment worth slowing down on. Not which one performed better over the last 10 years, but what am I actually trying to build? And what criteria should I be using to decide? That's the question this video is designed to help you work through, not to hand you a definitive answer, but to help you arrive at one that belongs to you. Let's start with what the S&P 500 actually is, because this is where most comparisons get shallow. The S&P 500 is not just a basket of 500 companies. It is a market cap-weighted index that continuously adjusts its own composition based on what the market values most right now. When technology and growth companies rise, the index shifts more of its weight toward them. When a sector loses value relative to the rest of the market, the index gradually reduces its weight there. You don't make that call. The structure makes it for you automatically, consistently, without emotion. That self-adjusting quality is genuinely valuable in a way that's easy to underestimate. Think about an investor who held the S&P 500 through the early 2000s dot-com correction. The portfolio fell, like almost everything else. But that investor never had to decide which technology companies deserved to survive the crash and which ones didn't. They never had to rebalance into or out of sectors at exactly the wrong time. The index recalibrated on its own, slowly, quietly, toward whatever the market was ultimately repricing upward. All that investor had to do was hold. Now let's think about what a QQQ and SCHD combination is actually doing. QQQ is concentrated in technology and growth. The top holdings represent a large share of the entire portfolio. And while the specific companies change over time, the structural tilt toward high-growth businesses remains constant. This is not a diversified portfolio in the conventional sense. It is a deliberate bet that the technology and growth sector will continue to outperform the broader market over your investment horizon. That bet has worked well during certain extended periods, but it is still a bet, and it is worth being clear-eyed about that. SCHD takes a very different approach. It screens for dividend-paying companies based on financial quality metrics. Things like low debt levels, strong cash flow, and a consistent history of growing dividend payments. The companies that pass those screens tend to come from different industries than those in QQQ. Financials, consumer staples, healthcare, industrials. These are businesses that often behave differently from technology stocks when market conditions shift. And that difference does create a real degree of balance across the combined portfolio. But here's the part that often disappears in these comparisons. When you combine QQQ and SCHD, you are not running a passive strategy. You are making an active judgment call about which two specific segments of the global market will outperform everything else over your timeline. That might turn out to be exactly right, but it requires a level of conviction and a willingness to own the consequences if that conviction is wrong. Coming back to the original question, is QQQ and SCHD really better than the S&P 500? It depends entirely on what better means to you. If better means higher returns, the answer changes depending on when you measure it. During the period when technology led almost everything, the QQQ component pulled up overall performance significantly. But that same concentration pulled the portfolio down more sharply during growth sell-offs. The S&P 500 absorbed those same downturns more gradually because its weight was distributed across more sectors. If better means more income, SCHD adds a meaningful and growing dividend stream that the S&P 500 doesn't replicate. If your goal is to generate rising income without having to sell positions, that matters quite a bit. And the S&P 500 simply doesn't offer the same. If better means easier to hold, this is where the question becomes entirely personal. Some investors do better with one simple index and no ongoing decisions to make. Others do better when they understand the logic behind each component and feel the portfolio is doing two different jobs at once. Neither mindset is wrong, but they lead to very different answers about which structure actually serves you. The question worth asking is not which historically outperformed. The right question is which structure fits my timeline, my income needs, and my capacity to stay invested when things get uncomfortable. If you're early in your investment journey and focused purely on long-term compounding, a single broad index may serve you better than you expect. If you're at a stage where you want your portfolio to start generating a growing income stream, one that increases over time without requiring you to sell positions, the SCHD component starts to carry real weight in that decision. That single distinction, where you are in your investment journey, often answers the question before you even look at the performance data. Investing is not about finding the portfolio that looks best on a 20-year backtest. It is about finding the structure you can stay invested in, calmly, consistently through the years when nothing feels certain. The investors who build meaningful wealth over long periods are rarely the ones who found the optimal allocation. They are the ones who found a structure they genuinely believed in, one they could hold through the slow quarters, the down years, and the moments when a different approach looked significantly better in hindsight. That kind of patience is only possible when your portfolio matches your actual criteria, not the criteria you absorbed from someone else's framework, not the criteria that looked convincing on a chart. Covering the best decade for growth stocks, your criteria built around your timeline, your income goals, and the level of volatility you can absorb without changing your behavior. If today's video helped bring any of that into focus, even slightly sharper than before, then it did exactly what it was meant to do. Not to tell you that QQQ and SCHD is better than the S&P 500. Not to tell you the S&P 500 is better than QQQ and SCHD, but to help you ask the right question for where you actually are right now. Compounding quietly investing that gives you peace of mind. If this video helped, subscribe and leave a like. I hope this becomes a small source of strength in your investment journey. The content in this video is for general informational purposes only. All final decisions and responsibilities remain with the investor. Thank you for spending time with Compounding Quietly today.